Welcome back to the Woodshop Nerdery. I'm Tom, and I need your help deciding which of these two thickness planers I should keep. The problem is, my garage shop is just too small to keep both of these planers. At the end of the video, I'm going to ask you to leave some comments giving me your best advice on which one to keep. But before I ask you to do that, I'm going to take you through some basic maintenance steps on each of these planers, run some sample boards through each planer so you can see the quality of results, and bring up some specifications side by side in a spreadsheet so you can compare and contrast their capabilities. Okay, let's get started. I have 4 pieces of scrap 2x4 that I'll use for testing. I'll label the pieces 1, 2, 3, and 4 so I can keep track of them during the tests. Typically, before I run any workpiece through the thickness planer, I joint one face and then I joint an adjacent edge to make sure I have 2 sides that are square to each other. So I'll go ahead and prepare my test pieces the same way. I'll test the wind thickness planer first. But before I get the test started, I want to make sure things are cleaned up, we got a fresh coat of paste wax on the tables, and that everything is fine-tuned and set up properly. I want to make sure that the gear mechanisms, which raise and lower the motor and cutter head relative to the table, are clean, in good condition, and well oiled. Since I want to compare the dust collection on both of these units, I want to remove any loose dust before I start testing. I also take a close look at the blades. I want to make sure that there are no major nicks or dirt or debris stuck in here that might impact the performance. All the blades look to be in pretty good shape, so after a quick cleaning, I go ahead and reassemble everything. According to the manual for this unit, the outfeed and infeed tables should sit about 1 millimeter higher than the main table. So I measure the offset and make some minor adjustments to the table height screws to get it right at 1 millimeter. I'm almost ready to begin running the sample pieces through the planer. When I do, I'm going to run the video at normal speed so you can get an idea of how fast the planer feeds the workpieces through. As you can see, the wind planer feeds the pieces through pretty fast. And since I haven't used this one in a while, I'm caught off guard by it and my workpieces fall to the floor. A little more prepared this time, I still miss the workpiece and it falls to the floor. Third time must be a charm. I actually catch the workpiece this time before it falls to the floor. As a solution, I can turn the planer parallel to the workbench so that when the workpieces come off the end of the table, they just drop onto the workbench surface. But in this orientation, I'm using up my entire workbench for infeed and outfeed, and I have no additional workspace to hold materials. So I'll give you a good look at how many wood chips and dust particles are left behind here in the planer and on the table. It's quite a bit, and I can tell you from experience that when I'm running a big batch of wood through this thickness planer, those chips pile up eventually, and it's quite a mess to clean off both the workbench, out of the planer, and off the floor of the workshop. Okay, now I'm ready to take a look at the Shopsmith planer. The safety key is missing, and some previous owner has disabled this safety mechanism on the switch. While I'm here, I will point out one positive about the Shopsmith thickness planer, which is this dial, which gives you infinitely variable speed control over the feed motor. It's hard to see, and actually, I haven't noticed any impact on the quality results I'm receiving, but there is some sort of damage here. Just like with the wind planer, I want to clean everything out before we begin. I also inspect the blades to make sure they're in good condition, clean, and ready to go. I also check and reset the calibration for the height of the infeed and outfeed table. I do this by testing the fit of a 1-2-3 block in the 2-inch dimension under the crossbars of the main body. To fine-tune the level of the table, I simply loosen the drive chain and then turn each post individually until that part of the table properly allows the 1-2-3 block to slide under the bar. According to the post made by several Shopsmith users on internet forums, the drive feed motor has a weakness, which is it contains a plastic gear. So I take apart the drive portion of the feed motor and inspect that gear to make sure that it's in good condition. Everything looks to be in great condition, no problems. There's plenty of grease here, so I reassemble the motor and put things back together. I'll let the reassembly process here play out so you can see how robust and sturdy all the components are that go into this Shopsmith planer. In just a few moments, I'm going to turn on the feed motor, and you'll hear some clicking sound. I'm not sure if that's normal or not, or if it indicates that there's a possible condition issue with this motor. If you know the answer to that, please leave a comment for me. I'd really appreciate it. Final steps here. I'm going to go ahead and wax the table just like I did for the wind. So I'm going to go ahead and get the testing started here. And just like for the wind, I'm going to run the video at normal speed so you can get an idea of how fast the workpieces come through the system. I have to say, I really prefer this setup. It's much more convenient. I can use my workbench as an outfeed table, and I can use the Shopsmith extension table and floating tables as a place to hold the workpieces. But in fairness to the wind, I could use a piece of plywood to mount the wind to the way tubes of the Shopsmith, just like this planer is mounted. And I could still use the workbench as an outfeed, and I could still use the extension and floating tables as extra workspace. This pass is the last pass, and you can see how slow the workpieces are running through the planer. That's because I have the feed motor speed turned all the way down. Also, I didn't make any change to the table height, so I'm cutting at the same depth as the last pass. I find that this has a huge advantage in eliminating any snipe that might have been caused in earlier passes. And we do have a little bit of dust and chips left behind by the dust collection system here on the Shopsmith. But if I had to make a ratio guesstimate, I would say it's about 1/50th of what the wind planer left behind. So the Shopsmith dust collection is much better. So here are both pairs of test boards planed to thickness. I planed them to about 30 millimeters thick. And I got a really good thickness accuracy on both of those. So both planers did a great job getting down to the thickness that I wanted. The pair on the left went through the Shopsmith planer. The pair on the right went through the wind planer. On the wind, very little snipe, although it is present. Pretty good consistency in thickness. and just a wonderful surface as well. And I think, you know, having the 3 blades in the planer help with that surface. The Shopsmith has virtually no snipe. I cannot see any snipe on this board, either of these boards. The surface is very nice, probably even a little better than the Win, but I would still probably end up sanding this. If I were to join these together, there is no, I cannot feel a difference in the seam here anywhere along the seam. It is perfectly flush. So these would clamp up really nicely, although like I said, I would still end up sanding them. So even though the results are good here, are totally acceptable, it's a great planer, I have to say that the Shopsmith is a little better.
So now let's take a look at some of the specification differences between the Shopsmith and the Win. In this table, I'm going to show you the features of each unit. They both have 3 blades. They both use high-speed steel blades. The Win blades are disposable, and the Shopsmith blades are resharpenable or reusable. I don't see a winner here. It's just a different set of pros and cons. The Shopsmith planer is about 5 pounds lighter according to the specifications. However, I don't think that 5 pounds is going to make or break me, so I consider these to be about the same weight. The Shopsmith does have a variable speed feed motor and a variable speed cutter head. The Win does not. The Shopsmith has 4 lift posts to raise and lower the table, whereas the Win has only 2 lift posts raising and lowering the cutter head. The Shopsmith also has the ability to manually adjust the pressure that the rollers apply to the wood. On the other hand, the Shopsmith is quite a bit older than the Win, and that could be problematic down the road. Both of these units have a safety switch, but the safety switch on the Shopsmith is broken. And I have to say, I do really like having that depth of cut gauge on the Win. There's no such gauge on the Shopsmith. And when I'm using the Shopsmith, I really do miss that gauge. The table on the Win is a little bit wider than the Shopsmith planer, but what really matters is the width of the cut. The Win can cut 13-inch wide board versus the Shopsmith can only cut a 12-inch wide board. And the maximum thickness on the Win is 6 inches versus the 4 inches maximum thickness on the Shopsmith. Both of the planers can cut about a maximum 3/32 inch per pass. So that's sort of a wash. In terms of cutter head speed and cuts per minute, feet per minute, I don't know how to interpret these numbers as one being better than the other. So I'm just going to leave them as neutral. In terms of subjective factors that I have observed through my own experience, the Win is in like new condition. There's really no problems with it whatsoever. It stores much better than the Shopsmith. Having the tables fold up is very convenient. However, the dust collection and the convenience of how the workpieces are fed through the system, the quality of surface that those systems produce, I got to put the advantage over to the Shopsmith. Also, I look at repairability. And by that, I mean, if something were to break on one of these units, how likely would I be to make a repair or attempt a repair? It's thin metal and plastic, and I think, just generally lower quality build construction. Whereas the Shopsmith, even though it is older, all the metal castings and aluminum castings and bolts and nuts, they're just really stout. And so I think if there were a problem, it would be much easier to repair because you're just working with more material. And I don't want to skip documentation either. The Shopsmith documentation on the Shopsmith planer is just phenomenal. It's almost more like a woodworking manual in addition to a machine manual. Whereas the Win manual is just your typical modern day manual that basically says, don't stick your hand in the cutter and, don't use it underwater and things like that. Your general modern day safety guidance. It really doesn't tell you anything about how to do woodworking with that tool.
Well, as you can see, there's good reasons for me to keep each of those planers. Unfortunately, I do have to narrow it down to just one. And even though we're nearing the end of the video, I would like to ask you to go ahead and leave me a comment with your best advice on which planer you think I should keep. I thank you in advance for taking the time to do so. And also, thanks for sticking with me to the end of the video. And please join me next week for another woodworking video in the Woodshop Nerdery. Bye.